One must know that they cannot control the business unfolding around them, as they cannot. They must look to understand the flow of news, finding their place in the market. Markets are places where buyers and sellers meet to conduct the sales of goods and services. These markets rely on the exchange of information regarding the price of goods and services at the present time. Once the price is set in the market, others will follow, using that information to expand or contract output. Modern central bankers tend to be both bold and arrogant as they control the price of money and therefore indirectly influence every market in the world. While others have abandoned this system that resulted in corruption, deflation, and low economic growth, Western central banks have embraced it. Since 2008, markets have become a venue for wealth extraction rather than wealth creation. As the U.S. federal government has repeated the blunders of other countries creating income equality and social unrest, it is visible that the central planning is not merely undesirable, but impossible. Central bankers constantly monitor declining unemployment and rising inflation as signals that there may be a need to tighten monetary policy, just as falling asset prices may signal a need to provide more monetary ease. These monitored indicators can produce false signals and additional policy manipulation. Stocks and housing make up most of the wealth of American people. This being said, when stocks and home values are going up, Americans feel richer and more prosperous. This in turn makes them more willing to save less and spend more. When rates are low, Americans can afford more, bigger mortgages. Brokers in turn offer cheap margin loans to clients, resulting in more stock buying and higher stock prices. When the Fed believes that inflation is at risk of becoming stagnant, it makes sense for them to drop interest rates, allowing more people to buy homes, creating a risk in market value, and making Americans feel richer and spend looser. This is what the Fed thinks will cause inflation. From 2008 through 2012, the year-over-year increase in the Consumer Price Index averaged just 1.8% per year, the lowest period since 1965. Critics have expected for years that inflation would rise sharply in the U.S. in response to money being printed, but that is yet to happen. The U.S. began to witness signs of deflation in 2013. As Americans import cheaper goods from trading partners, inflation will begin to pause. Cheap goods from a large labor force such as China with an undervalued currency aided in less than stellar inflation or even deflation. The federal funds effective rates have fluctuated from 1.67% in 2002 up to 3.4% in 2005. By 2007, it was back over 5%. The low rate policy led to a housing bubble, which crashed in 2007, making the start of a depression. Collateral value behind $1 trillion in subprime mortgages and derivatives based on these mortgages was virtually destroyed. What did the Fed do to try and remedy the situation? Make Americans feel like they were worth more with home ownership and lower rates close to zero. If the Fed would have just relented in its money printing, deflation would have more than likely come over the economy, causing consequences for national debt, government revenue, and the banking system. The Fed not only has to keep up with what its own country is doing, but also must keep up with other countries' downward price on labor cost and technological production accelerations. The world keeps telling us that it wants to deflate, while the government will do everything in its power to only allow inflation. In fighting deflation, the Fed is causing minor meltdowns in markets far removed from the main arena of U.S. government bond interest rates. From 2008 to 2013, inflation was low, but it was not zero. During this time, though, income was close to zero. Real incomes declined during this time, even in a low inflation environment. This is problematic as deflation allows a bonus to people, allowing an increase in standard of living when wages are stagnant. A 0% interest rate policy potentially causes a $400 billion per year transfer in wealth from Americans to large banks. A normalized interest rate of 2% would pay money to savers rather than allowing banks to relend free money at low interest rates, turning large profits with less risk. The Fed's desire is to penalize savers and discourage them from leaving money in banks, encouraging them to invest in risks such as stocks and real estate. As we all know, homeownership is the American dream. This Fed manipulation designed to discourage savings will actually increase savings due to those being precautionary to make up this lost interest. Job creating comes largely from small businesses in America, When the Fed distorts the interbank lending market by keeping rates too low, it deprives small business of working capital loans and hurts their ability to fund job creation. The most alarming consequence of Fed manipulation is the prospect of a stock market crash playing out over a period of a few months or less. When the Fed underestimates potential growth, the result will be that interest rates will be too low, with inflation and negative real interest rates. This will in turn hurt capital formation and likely to produce the worst stock returns for investors. When the Fed overestimates potential growth, policy will be too tight and the economy will go into a recession. This tight policy will hurt corporate profits and cause stocks to decline. When one country enters deflation, many other countries will follow suit to increase inflation through trade. Japan and Korea have cut rates in order to cheapen its currency, resulting in global confusion. All countries are running a large business and they know that they have to meet or beat the market price in order to keep production. Unequal information between buyer and seller causes adverse feeling of whether the pricing is correct. If you are buying a used car from an individual, you assume that the seller has more information than you, the buyer. If the price appears too low, the buyer automatically fears that the product is flawed and potential disaster awaits. These adverse feelings between buyer and seller have caused a lack of investment to occur throughout history, notably the Great Depression. The three greatest periods of uncertainty in the last 100 years have occurred in the 1930s with interventionist policies, price controls, subsidies, labor laws, and gold confiscation. In the 1970s and 80s with price control abandonment and crude oil windfall property tax. Today, with uncertainty caused by budget battles, healthcare regulations, tax policy, and environmental regulation, it is not uncommon to currently discuss how we have no idea what our health insurance premiums will be next year, what tax bracket we will fall in, and whether or not our employer will continue to meet regulation standards or decide to close up shop. The central planner must suspend belief in one's intervention to gather information about the intervention's effect. Not only must they drink the Kool-Aid, but the more these institutions intervene in the markets, the less they know about the real economic conditions and the greater the need to intervene is. Those who control the markets do not trust the markets themselves.